Johnson! Your #1 job description is to keep Duncan Johnson. It's time for you to produce. I'm tired of your excuses. That report was due on my desk at 9 o'clock this morning. 9 o'clock this morning.
Introducing Metal Gear Solid 2, Substance, only on Xbox. The original smash hit, plus loads of extra gameplay, like over 500 new missions, exciting new storylines, and all new playable characters. Not to mention some of the meanest bosses you'll ever encounter. Metal Gear Solid 2, Substance, only on Xbox. Rated M for mature from Konami.
What the?
The Xbox is everything The Rock is. Cutting edge, powerful, exhilarating, and like The Rock, it will be the most electrifying thing coming out this year. And what The Rock is to sports entertainment and to the WWF, the Xbox will be to the video game industry a breakthrough and certainly an original. I mean, The Rock doesn't impress easily, Bill, you know that, but I'm pretty damn impressed with what we're seeing here today. And considering that this Xbox at this moment is only running on 1/5 of the system's power, it's very impressive. Bill, do you have any idea what The Rock would be like if he were only running on 1/5 of his power?
Well, I would think that...
It doesn't matter what you think, Bill. I'm sorry, Bill. It's just a force of habit. Rock apologizes. No, The Rock, even at 1/5 of his power, would still blow everybody out of the water, just like the Xbox. It is truly the future of video games, and I'm very excited to simply be a part of it if you smell what The Rock is cooking.
Thank you.
On November the 15th, 2001, finally saw the release of the Microsoft Xbox in North America. Released with a $299 price point and with a strong lineup of launch titles, the Xbox was a massive seller during Christmas 2001, proving it caught the hearts of hardcore gamers and teenagers alike. By the end of 2001, Microsoft would have shipped 1.5 million Xboxes, and the majority of that inventory would have been sold throughout the holiday period. With the original Xbox being a massive seller during Christmas 2001 in North America, 2002 for Microsoft looked like a hell of a year for them. It wasn't long before the system was released in Europe and Japan in 2002. Excitement swelled for the likes of Splinter Cell, The Elder Scrolls Morrowind, and the fantastic MechAssault. Although Microsoft didn't really impress the Japanese gamers, it would be Europe where Microsoft would captivate the hardcore gamers of Britain and Europe alike. Initially released at the price point of £300, it was a really great seller initially in the UK. But unfortunately for Microsoft, the strong sales didn't last. In order to aggressively compete with the PlayStation 2, Microsoft soon dropped the price of the Xbox console from £300 down to £199. Not only did this price drop come only 2 months after the initial launch in Europe, but gamers who forked out full price for the machine on launch day were really pissed off at Microsoft. Understandably, Microsoft knew that these early adopters would be pissed off at the sudden price drop and offered the early adopters some free games for the trouble of actually going down and picking a console up for £300 on the launch day. The Xbox was the hardcore gamers console of choice for that time, But the general consensus from gaming retail during its earlier years was the fact that the Xbox really didn't offer much over the PlayStation 2. There were reports from gaming retailers and the press alike that the original Xbox was just providing really sluggish sales for some stores. Microsoft was also concerned about the dire performance of the console's sales in Japan as well. With the reports of the console not selling very well in Japan, the press wanted to know how many consoles were actually sold to consumers in that particular region, but Microsoft would not release those particular figures at that time and would only state that they had shipped 1.5 million Xboxes in the US the previous year. Nevertheless, Microsoft was still optimistic that they would still meet their sales targets by the end of 2002. But the Xbox was still priced higher than the PlayStation 2 in Japan, which would be the only region in the world where the Xbox sold at a higher price than the PlayStation 2. And thus, Microsoft would struggle to try and grab a share of the Japanese market. Excluding the UK, the rest of Europe would receive a price drop which would knock down the original Xbox to €249, from the original €479. And at this time of this sudden price drop, the Nintendo GameCube hadn't been released yet in Europe, with the reported price tag of £150. Nintendo at the time weren't concerned about the initial Xbox price cut, stating that they didn't believe that the Xbox would harm their initial launch plans. 2002 is a mixed year for Microsoft. To coincide with the 2002 UK launch of the Xbox, Microsoft obviously wanted to raise awareness about its new console in that particular region, but the Independent Television Committee, ITC, swiftly banned a television commercial advertising the original Xbox, after complaints that the advertisement was shocking, offensive and in bad taste. One of the biggest business decisions that Microsoft made during 2002 was the acquisition of Rare for $375 million. This gave Microsoft 100% of the company, and it's from this point in gaming history that Rare will exclusively be a first-party developer for Microsoft. This meant that Donkey Kong Racing, which was due for release on the Nintendo GameCube, was left unreleased. The trademarks from the characters that Rare created for the Nintendo consoles, such as Conker of Conker's Bad Fur Day and Banjo of the Banjo-Kazooie games, are intellectual properties owned by Rare. But properties which are owned by Nintendo, such as Donkey Kong and Star Fox, are owned by Nintendo and are no longer associated with Rare. Star Fox Adventures, originally known as Dinosaur Planet for the Nintendo 64, was delayed for a number of years until it was finally released for the Nintendo GameCube. This is the only Rare developed game for Nintendo's 6th generation console. Despite the acquisition, Rare would still develop games for Nintendo's handheld consoles over the years, as Microsoft is not participating in the handheld console market. It would be 2003 when Rare would release their first Microsoft developed game, Grabbed by the Ghoulies. In 2005, Rare would re-release Conker's Bad Fur Day as Conker Live and Reloaded for the Xbox. This particular release would see an overhaul in graphics, sound, and have a fully online option for multiplayer action. While both games aren't massive system sellers, both particular titles received favourable reviews and cemented their place in the Xbox's portfolio as quality titles. Although some gamers out there didn't think the whole acquisition of Rare by Microsoft was a good thing for the gaming industry. They stated that Microsoft was just merely buying their way into the gaming industry and that they could have set up their own studios to create their own original IP without buying another studio outright. At the end of August 2002, Microsoft started its Xbox Live beta test. During this time, for the majority of people out there, online gaming for consoles was an unfamiliar process, but Microsoft had the infrastructure and the money to actually make the whole thing work, and it had to be put through its paces before it went into full release. The Xbox was made ground up for broadband gaming, and when it was originally released in 2001 in the US, the as yet unnamed online service was destined for summer 2002 deployment. Xbox Live was finally given its name at E3 2002. Xbox Live's reveal at E3 came complete with sound dampened booths and an early version of Unreal Championship and an RC racer called Revolt Live. Xbox Live beta testers would pay $49.99 for the Xbox Live starter kits that we would see later on in November, complete with a headset and a year's subscription. Once the service went fully live later that year, users would receive a demo of Revolt Live. This would be the only chance that gamers would have to play Revolt Live, as it was never released. Microsoft would announce that over 50 titles the following year would have Xbox Live support. Overall, 2002 helped the Xbox gain some momentum. Although the console gained strong third-party support from its inception, many early Xbox games did not fully use its powerful hardware, with few additional features or graphical improvements to distinguish them from the PS2 versions. It's probably fair to say that the Xbox had a slow start during 2001 and 2002, but I would say that the Xbox had some really good highlights. 2002 brought the Xbox MotoGP, MechAssault, Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon, and of course, Splinter Cell. By the end of 2002, Microsoft would have shipped a total of 8 million Xbox units, along with some strong third-party and first-party titles which were released in 2002. 2003 and 2004 would also help strengthen the Xbox's portfolio, rather than just being a machine which had lots of PlayStation 2 ports. In 2002 had its fair share of classic Xbox games, but one title usually slips people by. Death Row was a highly acclaimed exclusive title for the Xbox, receiving largely positive reviews and an aggregated score of 79 out of 100 from Metacritic and 81% from GameRankings. IGN and Team Xbox both named Death Row an Editor's Choice. The game won Team Xbox's 2002 Breakthrough Game of the Year award, and IGN's 2002 Best Xbox Game That Nobody Played. If you can get the game for a really cheap price, it's definitely worth picking up. It's one of my personal all-time favourites for the original Xbox, and it has a really great multiplayer option with a lot of great maps, teams to choose from, and a customisable soundtrack. Death Row comes highly recommended. Before we go into 2003, one of the mistakes that Microsoft made when they released the original Xbox was the original controller. Now, a lot of gamers were quite happy with the original controller, and some actually preferred playing Halo with the original large Duke controller. But it seemed the majority of gamers worldwide weren't happy with the size of the controller. Now, Japan was the only region in the world which didn't get the original Duke controller on release. The Controller S, a smaller, lighter Xbox controller, was originally the standard controller for Japan. Designed for users with smaller hands, the Controller S was later released in other territories by popular demand in 2002. This then replaced the standard controller in the US Xbox's retail packaging and in Europe in 2003, with the larger original Duke controller remaining still available only as an accessory.
The Rock and Bill Gates are known worldwide for their vast array of catchphrases. For example, The Rock has "Know your role and shut your mouth," "Just bring it, jabroni," and Bill Gates, you have some pretty cool catchphrases as well. What are some of your favorites?
My favorite is probably writing hardcore C to create slick tight code.
Rated M for mature.
Hey! Sit it!
Play with a friend or play with yourself. Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball. Tecmo. 100% games.
For hot beaches, there's no power greater than X.
Dang.
Right, maybe 30 long left, maybe.
At the start of 2003, the true cost of Microsoft's determined assault on the console market was soon becoming apparent, with new figures filed by the company with the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US revealed that 3 months leading up to the end of December 2002, Microsoft lost $348 million on its Xbox division. This is almost twice the loss sustained for the same period 1 year earlier, when the company lost $180 million on revenues of $833 million. Put into simpler terms, the higher figure is almost certainly linked to the price cuts and bundle deals which Microsoft has used to carve itself a slice of the market. Larger losses in this context can perversely mean that the company is actually selling more consoles. This massive expenditure on the Xbox wasn't bringing home the kind of success that Microsoft was hoping for. Xbox component supplier, Focus Enhancements, revealed that Microsoft has warned it did not expect any volume of orders for the first half of 2003. The company, which makes video encoder chips used in the console, was told that Xbox sales are falling below Microsoft's forecasts, resulting in reduced component orders. From a financial standpoint, it sounded like all doom and gloom. But for gamers, 2003 and 2004 would see some of the best Xbox titles released in its library. In addition to the second generation Xbox titles due to be released in 2003, 2003 also saw a host of limited edition Xbox consoles released in varying regions around the world. 2003 saw the release of Sega's Panzer Dragoon Orta in the US, Europe and Australia. In Japan, on December the 19th, 2002, the Panzer Dragoon Orta Special Edition Xbox was released to commemorate the release of, obviously, Panzer Dragoon Orta. The console's special features included a white case with the Panzer Dragoon Orta logo located on the top lower hand corner of the machine, as well as some of the artwork from Orta surrounding the Xbox Duel. The unit was only available to those who pre-ordered on November the 1st, 2002 through Sega Direct. Included with the special edition console was a matching white controller S, an Xbox Component AV cable, an Xbox Component AV pack, a copy of Panzer Dragoon Orta with its CD soundtrack, and a dragon head necklace. In total, there was only 999 Panzer Dragoon Orta Xbox consoles released. If you do see one of these extremely rare consoles on the internet, like sites such as eBay, expect to pay quite a heavy price for it. On the 2nd of May 2003, a translucent green limited edition Xbox was released in Europe to celebrate the Xbox's 1-year European birthday. The console came with 2 matching controller S's and retailed for £149 and €229. It had a limited manufacture of 20,000 units, but only sold 5,000 units in Europe. The styling of the translucent green Xbox is identical to the debug units used in game development, but obviously the retail versions lacked the words debug kit printed on the front of the Xbox. The green controller S, which was bundled with the translucent green Xbox, would be available in retail sold separately. The translucent green limited edition Xbox was also released in Canada and came with 1 matching green controller S and 2 games, Crimson Skies and Project Gotham Racing 2. As of 2015, there is still an undetermined amount of case variations for the original Xbox. Throughout the generation of the original Xbox, many competitions and events were held and sponsored by Microsoft, donating one-off special edition consoles for the events. Many of these systems were airbrushed by skilled artists and are very desirable and collectible in today's market. Some of these Xbox case variations were made purely just for Xbox employees or to coincide with major game releases. Games such as Tony Hawk's Underground 2, Dead or Alive, 50 Cent, and there was even a Mountain Dew Xbox and a Hello Kitty Xbox. Personally, there's quite a few different case variations for the original Xbox that I quite like, but some of my favourites would be the limited edition green Xbox, the extremely rare Halo Orange Xbox, and the Panda Dragoon Auto Xbox. While doing some of my research for this particular retrospective, I found that there was a factory which produced all of these different variations of cases. Now, some of these cases never made it into full production, but the majority of these cases were either used for employee incentives or for in-store promotions and collaborations with marketing companies. With the addition of Xbox Live in 2002, the Xbox fanbase continued to grow. But one popular game developer, Electronic Arts, took issue with the subscription-based structure of Xbox Live. They opted out of releasing their popular sports games for the Xbox in 2003, only to cut a deal with Microsoft a year later. But during Christmas 2003, it meant that every PlayStation 2 game which was produced by Electronic Arts had PlayStation 2 Online plastered all over it, while Xbox players had to make do with local multiplayer. Strangely enough, once Microsoft secured a deal with Electronic Arts, Microsoft announced on the 29th of May 2004 that its sports division, XSN, would not be releasing any more games that year, citing quality issues. With Shane Kim taking over in 2004, the decision was made to stop investing in sports games with two strong competitors on the market, EA Sports and 2K Sports, and to focus their resources elsewhere. On the 20th of August 2004, Microsoft closed down their internal sports studio, resulting in the layoff of 76 employees. Although the Salt Lake studio was not affected at the time, just a few months later they were sold to 2K Games in October 2004. In 2003 and 2004 would have its fair share of cancelled Xbox games. Often cited as one of the most disappointing project cancellations of recent years, True Fantasy Live Online was highly anticipated almost right from the moment it was announced in 2002 and was touted as one of the premier titles for the Xbox and for its Xbox Live Online service in Japan. Despite being fully playable and near completion according to Microsoft, around the time of its cancellation, the title's development was littered with complications from the very beginning. One such problem was Level 5's inexperience with online network coding and their inability to properly implement voice chat compatibility into the game. It was a feature never before implemented on such a large scale in a massive multiplayer online RPG. However, Microsoft was very adamant on its inclusion, as it was a key feature to their Xbox Live service. Relations between the two companies soon began to spiral out of control as Level 5 struggled to meet the demands required by Microsoft, who in turn grew frustrated by the lack of progress being made onto the game. After an extremely short and rather underwhelming showing at the Tokyo Game Show in 2003, True Fantasy Live Online was quietly delayed from its initial fall 2003 release into 2004. From then, little was seen or heard about from the title, and after a surprising absence from 2004's E3 convention, it was officially cancelled by Microsoft on June the 2nd. Lamborghini was a racing video game developed by Rage Software. It was cancelled in 2003 due to Rage going into bankruptcy. The team that worked on Lamborghini went on to create the game studio Juice Games, which in turn created the Juiced Racing series. There's a few avid collectors out there who have actually got the full version of Lamborghini on disc and have actually shared these videos on YouTube. Admittedly, I'm very jealous of the people who have got these discs. The game actually got very good reviews from magazines that received review copies from Rage Software. The majority of people that have played Lamborghini have played it in a demo form on the official Xbox magazine's demo disc. Before Perfect Dark Zero was an Xbox 360 launch title, it was in development for the Nintendo GameCube. But in 2002, Microsoft acquired Rare, and it became an Xbox game that was due to be released in 2004-2005. Just like Cameo, the reason why Perfect Dark Zero and Cameo didn't get released for the original Xbox, even though they were in the near completion stages of development, was the fact that Microsoft wanted those two games as launch titles for the Xbox 360. BC was an action-adventure video game developed by Intrepid Computer Entertainment, a satellite studio of Lionhead Studios, and due to be published by Microsoft Game Studios. The game was cancelled in 2004 due to unknown reasons. BC was going to take place during a prehistoric time period of a single continent which contained 5 levels. The player controls a tribe who has to evolve and migrate to become the best species in the game. Tribe members can be of different classes and each can level up different ways to evolve. The main enemies in the game are ape-like creatures called simians. However, the world is also inhabited with many types of dinosaurs as well as other creatures, including the dodo. When the game was still in production, Peter Molyneux stated that he was unsure whether he could release it due to the ambitious nature of the gameplay and the high standards that the people developing it were pushing it for. According to one article, as of May 2002, the demo build, which was roughly 50% complete, its cancellation was announced in late 2004, with Peter Molyneux stating, "The decision to suspend work on any games project is a very difficult one, particularly when it's a title with the potential of BC." There are many other cancelled Xbox games which never saw the light of day, but thanks to the internet there is still plenty of information regarding these games online. Down below in the video description I will link some websites which have been very helpful in supplying me with this information. A couple of these websites which are well worth mentioning is the Xbox Archive and Past to Present Online. Past to Present also has a YouTube channel which I highly recommend that you check out. Past to Present also details all of the alpha and beta versions of Xbox games which never saw the light of day, or they vary from the final versions of these games that got released. So I highly recommend that you check these websites out, and I also want to say a quick thanks to Past to Present and Xbox Archive, particularly for the preservation of video games, because without them we wouldn't have this information. 2003 saw the release of a once exclusive PlayStation franchise.
Rockstar Games presents Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Out now on PlayStation 2 and Xbox as part of the Double Pack with Grand Theft Auto 3.
Back in October 2001, Rockstar Games released Grand Theft Auto 3 for the PlayStation 2, and everything changed. A genre was defined by a gameplay formula which still persists to this very day. Many millions of copies were sold, and the Megabucks franchise was born. Grand Theft Auto 3 was released exclusively for the PlayStation 2 in 2001. It wouldn't be until 2003 that the Xbox would not only receive Grand Theft Auto 3, but also Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Grand Theft Auto 3 for the Xbox was enormously improved over its PlayStation 2 and PC versions. Rockstar North developed not only the PlayStation 2 and PC version of GTA 3, but they also created Grand Theft Auto Vice City. It would be Rockstar Vienna that would be tasked in the development duties in porting over the Xbox versions. To begin with, Rockstar Vienna addressed some of the performance issues which plagued the PlayStation 2 versions of GTA 3 and Grand Theft Auto Vice City. The Xbox version was far smoother with fewer frame rate drops, and also Rockstar Vienna improved some of the glare and pop-in. These improvements would have been good enough alone, but Rockstar Vienna didn't stop there. A wide range of graphical improvements were introduced to make most of the Xbox's hardware and to make sure that this was the best version of GTA 3 and GTA Vice City. The majority of this hard work was made a lot easier for Rockstar Vienna with the work that Microsoft made with DirectX API. The development tools at Rockstar Vienna's disposal in 2003 greatly enhanced the overall graphical experience in the GTA Double Pack. Spectacular lighting was added, allowing the dynamic and realistic reflection maps on vehicles. This now means that the car's sheen on the bodywork now reacts differently according to the metallic paintwork and to the light sources in the environment. Effects work was also greatly boosted. Rockstar Vienna managed to improve the radiosity of the fire during cutscenes and in gameplay. Particle effects including vehicle headlights were also greatly improved, with stormy weather resulting in rain going over the player's screen during gameplay. The biggest upgrade came in terms of character detail. Every character in the GTA Double Pack now had double the amount of polygons. For example, Claude, the silent GTA 3 protagonist, now has fingers rather than clubbed fists. The vehicles in the Xbox conversion also benefited from the boost in detail. This meant that underbonnet engine detail was now modelled in full 3D rather than being a flat texture. Wheels were also significantly more rounded. Although not quite so wide-ranging, environmental detail was also greatly improved, with vegetation and trees in particular standing out in the Xbox conversion. Buildings were also enhanced too, not only in terms of detail but also in terms of shadowing. Audio also got a significant boost as well, with a higher frequency and a better quality output. Texture work on the Xbox conversion operated in a much higher resolution than the PlayStation 2 and PC versions. Initially, the PC version did not include the enhanced assets that the Xbox version had. It wouldn't be until the latest Steam versions that the PC version would include the enhanced assets. It would then be up to modders to include the missing assets from the Xbox versions. And last but not least, the Xbox version had the inclusion of customizable soundtracks. This was a feature that was just not possible on the PlayStation 2 versions. With the Grand Theft Auto franchise now on the Xbox console, it would be the exclusive titles released in 2003 and 2004 which would help bolster the Xbox's sales and its library. Like with any gaming system, there are titles which define that particular console, and they are also games which drag it down. In theory, well developed and highly rated exclusive titles for the Xbox should improve its sales, but games like Quantum Redshift didn't find the initial audience upon release. These titles, which were released in 2003 and 2004, helped define the Xbox as a strong competitor against the PlayStation 2 and the GameCube. The Xbox is no stranger to bad games. From its initial launch in 2001, games like Zurich got mediocre to bad reviews. While some of these games aren't as bad as what some people say, some of these titles were overhyped beyond belief, whereas some games, like Aquaman, were colossal piles of shit. One of the biggest disappointments for me as an Xbox gamer, and for a couple of my friends as well, was a game called Racing Evolution, or as it's better known in the USA, Apex. Overhyped and billed to be a Gran Turismo killer, Racing Evolution gave players the chance to run their own racing team and to design their own cars. While the idea came across in the main product, the actual gaming mechanics were completely broken. At the time of its release, the graphics on Racing Evolution were actually quite incredible. The track designs were excellent, the frame rate was consistent, and all of the cars looked really crisp and detailed. But obviously a game is as good as it plays, and the physics engine and the handling of the cars in Racing Evolution were completely broken. Another highly anticipated Xbox game was Dino Crisis 3. Now this was a big deal for Microsoft. Not only was Capcom a Japanese developer, they had a once exclusive PlayStation franchise now appearing on their console. I remember the huge anticipation for Dino Crisis 3 and what the Xbox could do to take the franchise to another level, but upon reading the actual reviews, the game sounded absolutely terrible. The most common criticism was the camera system. IGN named Dino Crisis 3 as having the worst camera ever. The problem was due to the high speeds that the player would frequently travel at. As with the first two Dino Crisis titles and the early elements of the Resident Evil series, the rooms in Dino Crisis 3 are separated into invisible zones where the camera is set to change once the boundary is crossed. Because of the fast-moving jetpack, players would travel between these boundaries rapidly, with multiple camera angles changing, leading to confusion as to where the player is supposed to be going, resulting in the player inadvertently turning back on themselves. Because of the large zones and the long-range auto-aim targeting system, IGN suspected that players would spend 80% of their game firing at enemies that don't appear on the screen. GamePro was disappointed with the way of the enemies' entry into battle, with them literally appearing out of thin air.
Surprise, motherfucker!
Dino Crisis 3 was one of the worst gaming sequels ever, and undoubtedly one of the biggest disappointments for Xbox owners in 2003. The piss-poor camera system and the monotonous level design really killed Dino Crisis 3 and the Dino Crisis franchise. And finally, RoboCop. Judging by the reviews, I wasn't the only person who thought that this game was an insult to the classic movie.
Have you ever seen RoboCop, the movie? It's great! It's not this! This is...
Oh, yeah.
When does RoboCop say, oh yeah?
Halfway through 2004, Microsoft's online service would have nearly 1 million Xbox Live paid members, with titles such as Return to Castle Wolfenstein and Tokyo Race Driver 2 proven to be hugely popular with Xbox gamers. It was only natural that when Halo 2 came out at the end of 2004, the Xbox would not only see an increase in console sales, but an increase in number of Xbox Live players. On release, Halo 2 was the most popular video game on Xbox Live, holding that rank until the release of Gears of War on Xbox 360 nearly 2 years later. By the 20th of June 2006, more than 500 million games of Halo 2 had been played and more than 710 million hours had been spent playing it on Xbox Live. By the 9th of May 2007, this number had risen to more than 5 million unique players. Halo 2 is the best-selling first-generation Xbox game, with at least 6.3 million copies being sold in the US alone. The game received critical acclaim, with most publications lauding the strong multiplayer component. However, the single-player campaign was a focus of criticism for its cliffhanger ending. The first official release of Halo 2 was in Canada, Australia, New Zealand and the United States on November the 9th, 2004. Anticipation for the game was high. 3 weeks before release, a record 1.5 million copies had already been pre-ordered. Massive lines formed at midnight releases of the game. The event garnered significant media attention.
Microsoft is predicting that first day sales of Halo 2 will hit $100 million. $100 million by the end of today.
So we got 9 minutes to wait. Rub your fingers, get warm. It's about to come in 9 minutes. And no running. 8 minutes.
This moment has been awaited, eagerly awaited by millions of gamers around the world. We're about an hour away here in Times Square at the Toys R Us. It is mayhem. It's freezing outside, and yet there's hundreds of the Halo Nation out there. It's very, very exciting.
I thought about like nothing but this thing for like last 4 months. It's like episode 1 type of anticipation for me. I'm like so pumped.
Dual wielding 2 weapons at the same time, baby. Yeah, we got many different combinations with the weapons. Let's go, Halo 2!
You guys should go check out the Best Buy line. It's a lot bigger.
Look at that, Jack. Best Buy's kicking EV's ass.
I can like fucking see the line from here. No, I'm serious, dude. It's fucking huge. There's at least 300 people in the line.
Halo Nation, which is now over 5 million strong. It's interesting, unlike a lot of video games, it actually grew. It didn't explode and then diminish. You know, Halo Nation now, with it being Xbox Live on Halo 2, they just can't wait.
No other game does this.
There's a million Xbox Live subscribers. There's 1.5 million Halo people who have this pre-ordered. It's going to go for 2.5 million copies. So that's going to bring Xbox Live at least another 1 million customers.
For one, I was laid off, so I don't work tomorrow, which is great because Halo 2 is... and I'm done with school. I have no life. It's all about Halo.
They're moving the line.
Why?
Because people are causing too much trouble.
This is the assistant manager of EB Games.
That I am.
Are you excited to sell a fun ton of Halo copies?
That I am excited about it.
What's this number business? I didn't get any number.
You were here enough to get a number, sorry.
Oh, early enough?
Yeah.
What the fuck? I'm sorry, but I pre-ordered it 1.5 years ago.
The number thing came up last week. I didn't know about it. Really know.
Whatever, I came in just the other day and you saw me.
Yeah, we couldn't hand until tonight.
Would you?
Would you like to thank Bungie real quick before you go inside for all the money you're about
Yes,
to make?
thank you, Bungie, for all the money I'm about to make. Well, I'm not about to make it. Like,
There's still people flooding in.
I already got a bootleg copy. only $9. That's pretty good.
I'll buy mine first. You hang on to this.
In the next 72 hours, Halo 2 will be sold in 27 countries in 8 different languages. And there's going to be another 1,200 stores in London, Seoul, Tokyo, Toronto open in similar Midnight Madness events. I mean, this is bigger than a video game. This is a true entertainment phenomenon.
The game sold 2.4 million copies and earned up to $125 million in its first 24 hours on the store shelves, thus outgrossing the movie Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest as the highest grossing release in entertainment history. In the UK, the game sold 260,000 units in its first week, making the third fastest selling title in that territory. Several publications have listed Halo 2's matchmaking technology as one of the turning points in the gaming industry during the 2000s. American television channel G4 stated that Bungie's sequel was a shot in the arm for Xbox Live subscriptions and previewed many of the features that would set the standard for Microsoft's online service for their next machine. The editors of the Popular Mechanics listed Halo 2 as one of the top 15 events of the decade, crediting the game with bringing online multiplayer to the console masses. From 2005 onwards, Microsoft would quickly drop support for the Xbox in favour of their new console.
I just got these 3 here. $5.85. Youch! Better be some hot dog.
Be the zombie. Eat brains. Rip off arms. Create your own zombie army. And live like you're already dead. Stubbs the Zombie and Rebel Without a Pulse. In stores now. Rated M for mature.
Do you mind? What's this guy?
Big Daddy!
What's going on?
What up, Big Daddy?
What's happening?
What's the word?
Hey, step back just a little bit. Let my boy drop this. Oh, what you need? I need some money or some money.
the ring. Big Daddy.
Bow down before me.
Big Daddy.
All the ladies adore me.
Big Daddy.
Bow down.
Bow down. Outside the wall, your whole life's a wreck. You won't run, you're on the way. Check. You can't pay the rent. You can buy something, and all your money spent on this. Say no G first, go down when I'm second back. Knees and bow down to the Big Daddy. Bow down to the Big Daddy.
On the 12th of May 2005, MTV unveiled the Xbox 360. That same year, Nvidia ceased production of the original Xbox's GPU in August, which marked the end of brand new Xbox production. While the original Xbox would still see some strong titles released in 2005 and 2006, from 2006 onwards, support for the original Xbox would quickly dry up. With the Xbox 360 hype machine in full swing, games such as Far Cry Instincts, Forza Motorsport, Conquer Live and Reloaded, Fable, and of course Stubbs the Zombie, proved that there was still some life left in the original Xbox. But from 2006 onwards, it was clear where Microsoft's priorities were lying. At best, the Xbox's lineup during 2006 was mediocre. The Xbox would still see some strong third-party titles with the releases of Call of Duty 3, Tony Hawk's Project 8, Flat Out 2, Alien Hominid, and the excellent Painkiller port. From 2007 onwards, it was clear that the Xbox was on life support. The only noteworthy titles which were released during this period were sports titles made by EA. Games such as Madden would be one of the last games released for the original Xbox, whereas some titles such as Xiaolin Showdown, which was one of the last games to be released for the original Xbox in Europe, would see dire reviews but would also turn out to be one of the Xbox's rarest games. During the end of a console's lifespan, and the original Xbox in particular, there was quite a few games which missed their shining moment. A few of these games are critically acclaimed, some have got a cult following, and some of them go for a cheap price considering that they are classed as a rare title for the original Xbox. Still Life is a point-and-click adventure game released in 2005. The game revolves around the brutal serial murders of prostitutes in two different cities during different eras. You start the game in a modern-day Chicago as FBI agent Victoria McPherson. Victoria's inability to stop the killer starts getting the better of her, and she starts going through her belongings in a childhood room. This brings us to Gustav McPherson, Victoria's grandfather, who was a private detective in Prague in the late 1920s. The game now shifts characters to Gustav McPherson. Gustav is more personally haunted by his case than Victoria, and the story arc in Prague carries more weight because of his emotional involvement. The game cuts back and forth between the two stories, treating the murders in both eras with the same grim professionalism as a forensic procedural as CSI. It's the atmosphere which carries the experience in Still Life, and it's unlike any point-and-click adventure game I've played. The voice acting is well above average, the visuals are very good, and the storyline will keep you engaged right until the very end. The only gripes that I do have with the overall gameplay is the puzzles. While every point-and-click adventure game does have these puzzles to some degree, there are puzzles in Still Life which do artificially extend the gameplay. And one puzzle in particular really pissed me off. If you talk to anybody who has actually played the game, there is a puzzle where you have to bake some cookies. The game expects you to mix all the ingredients to make these cookies with a cryptic message left on the side of the worktop. I remember trying to do the actual puzzle without a walkthrough at the time, and I nearly tore my hair out. I eventually got past that part in the game by downloading a walkthrough from off the internet. And if anybody else does get stuck at this point in the game, which you will, I would just recommend you download a walkthrough and just save yourself all the hassle. At the time of its release, I remember Still Life not having many reviews in magazines. The game came to my attention after watching an episode on Cybernet. The only place I could find a copy of Still Life locally was in a shop called Game Station, and nowhere else would stock it. It's a pretty easy game to get hold of over eBay and Amazon, and it's fairly cheap as well. Some copies at most only go for £5, so if you can pick it up really cheap, it's definitely worth playing. Just a quick heads up, this game does have a lot of mature content. With the subject matter dealing with prostitutes and murder, there is a lot of scenes of nudity and graphic violence.
Call of Cthulhu: Dark Corners of the Earth is an action-adventure game released by Bethesda Softworks and developed by Headfirst Productions in 2005. In Call of Cthulhu, you control Jack Walters, who is investigating a disappearance in the town of Innsmouth.
This is it, stranger. End of the line.
Dark Corners of the Earth slowly descends into a first-person shooter of the traditional sort. Initially, the game is a slow-paced adventure game.
Evening.
Hi.
The name's Jack Walters. I'm just visiting.
You don't say, sir. Gilman. Charlie Gilman. I run this here hotel of an evening.
Requiring you, the player, to use various investigational methods to proceed throughout the game.
Do you know the Burnham lad? He worked...
Can't say I noticed what you're saying, stranger.
Stealth tactics.
Search the area. Did you hear that?
Blocking doors.
Break the door down, you damn fool.
Quick! I see him heading. Check the door.
And using various weapon pickups to fight off enemies. The game has a particularly strong foreboding atmosphere, which is unlike any other Xbox game out there. It is also one of the glitchiest and buggiest games released.
Oh shit.
Call of Cthulhu: Dark Corners of the Earth was delayed numerous of times, and it was no secret. This particular game was due to be released in the early 2000s on the Xbox, PS2 and the PC. Unfortunately, the extra development time and numerous delays didn't stop the game being a buggy mess. There are numerous problems with enemies glitching through walls, enemies detecting you even though you are hidden out of plain sight, and puzzles not actually detecting that you've completed a certain action successfully.
It won't budge.
Dark Corners of the Earth also has a very high difficulty curve, and I would recommend using a walkthrough to get past some of the numerous puzzles in this particular game. Dark Corners of the Earth isn't a masterpiece. It is one of those titles which has a great atmosphere and a story, but unfortunately the bugs and glitches in this title can drag it down.
Oh shit.
If you can see past the issues, it's well worth a play. Unfortunately, the game is quite high priced at the moment, with some collectors asking up to £30 for it. On a final note, Dark Corners of the Earth can be hacked into a widescreen mode, initially being shipped as a 4:3 aspect ratio only game. Down in the description box below, I will link a website on how to hex edit the files to run in widescreen mode.
William! William! For God's sake!
Your friend is dead.
Jesus Christ, no! You're a fool, Willie!
Look, fella, I know you're upset, but I really need some help.
Ah, you're the outsider they're hunting tonight. You don't have a hope, stranger. The Order's mob will be everywhere you turn. Down the sewers is the only place that them folks balk at venturing. And for good cause at that, mind you.
I can cope with foul air. It'll be a change from the stink of dead fish.
You're not getting my meaning, stranger. There's rumoring of real horrors in the black dankness beneath these streets. Maybe the folk with the Tain are devils. But at least they're devils of this earth. You ever hear tell of a Shaggoth, stranger?
Just tell me where I can get into the sewers.
Alright, you've been warned. Just the other side of this here building is a road leading down to the filtration plant. There's an open sewer pit down there. Good luck, stranger.
Double Steel, The Second Clash, is the Japanese-only sequel to the Xbox launch title Reckless, The Yakuza Missions. Second Clash is set in a free-roaming Chicago and features the two main characters from the original Reckless game, Madoka, Mai, and the Yakuza bigwig, Tiger Takaki. Takaki has been forced to leave Hong Kong following a US extradition order and is now preparing to face charges in Chicago. But he manages to break free out of jail and hook up with some old Yakuza friends, leading them on a violent crime spree across the city. It's now all down to Madoka and Mai to try and bring Takaki down, pursuing him through the Chicago streets in any one of up to 30 vehicles, including patrol cars, tanks, bombers, and even a flying saucer. Double Steel, The Second Clash, is easily one of the best looking games on the original Xbox. Boasting 720p high-definition graphics, a silky smooth frame rate, and an unprecedented amount of carnage happening on the screen all at once. Second Clash can easily be mistaken as an early Xbox 360 title, and while the game does look absolutely fantastic in motion, the game does suffer from repetitive gameplay and some sloppy design missions. Overall, it would take the average gamer about 6 to 7 hours to complete everything that Second Clash had to offer. It's a shame that the game only got a release in Japan. I remember at the time there was IGN and even Eurogamer giving the game some coverage when it was in development. In my personal opinion, I do think it was the release of the Xbox 360 which gave Microsoft the decision not to give the game a worldwide release. If you look in the right places, it's not a very difficult game to get hold of. Some copies on Amazon tend to go for £10, whereas in some cases in America, some copies go for over $30. The majority of original Xbox owners didn't actually realise there was a sequel to Reckless, The Yakuza Missions. So I do think the fluctuation in prices is down to gamers unexpectedly coming across the game and giving the game a high price even though the game is not particularly that rare. I would say given the overall quality of the game, try not to pay in anything of excess of £15. If you can get it for cheap, then it's a definite steal. From 2005 onwards, the Xbox would see an abundance of cancelled games. This would be in relation to the Xbox 360 being launched and the fact that Microsoft would only be supporting the Xbox up until 2006. One of these cancelled titles was called Fuel. This game was developed by Firetoad Software and was in development since its announcement in E3 2002. The initial press release for Fuel stated that there would be 3 different racing types in one: off-road, ATVs and personal watercrafts. There will be also a diverse range of different environments to race in. From the Caribbean to Morocco to the snowy north, you will travel around the world competing in many different races. There would be over 70 single-player tracks available and unlockable, featuring split-screen 4-player multiplayer mode and free roaming mode. There would be over 35 different vehicles to choose from, and you would use your skills to show off over 20 different stunts to acquire more points. There would be at least 8 characters representing each of these 8 stages as well. The game was originally due for release in 2006 on the original Xbox and the PC. There isn't any concrete information as to why Fuel was cancelled on the original Xbox back in 2006. It was speculated that Firetoad Software went into bankruptcy, thus halting the development of the game. In 2009, Asbo Studios released their open world racing game under the same title, Fuel. It is often mistaken that Fuel, which was released by Codemasters in 2009, is the same game which was being developed by Firetoad Software back in 2006. The original developer of Fuel back in the early 2000s, Firetoad Software, and the publisher, Dreamcatcher, aren't connected in any way to Hasbro Studios or Codemasters. It is mainly just a coincidence that these two titles have the same concept and the same name. Dead Space is a third-person survival horror game released in October 2008 for the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. It seems that in 2006, the team was working on a Dead Space prototype for the original Xbox, but it is currently unknown if the game was originally meant to be released on it, or if it was just a way to test the game before having a final 3D engine for the next-gen consoles. In 2009, at the Animex and Games Animation Festival, the art director of the Dead Space prototype, Ian Millam, displayed some footage at the festival. This video is the only footage which has been shown of the prototype game. Although the quality of the video is not particularly great, the graphics on the prototype look very close to the final product that is seen on the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3 versions. It just goes to prove that the original Xbox was a powerhouse for its time.
Mostly not good, but you can sort of see. So this is on the original Xbox. You can see the characters totally different, the enemies are totally different. But some of the concepts, like could we make a HUD-less game that people could still understand, were proven. Is dismemberment fun? Is stasis fun? All that stuff got proven.
During the years of the PlayStation 2, the original Xbox and the Nintendo GameCube, each one of these consoles would garner some of their most notorious hardware problems. And just with like any other console launch, the original Xbox did have its fair share of issues. Some of these hardware defects were minor and were corrected at a later date. But as the years have gone by, the original Xbox has accumulated a number of hardware issues which are quite serious. One of the most notorious problems with the original Xbox at launch was the console scratching discs. Now understandably a lot of people weren't happy about this, forking out for a brand new machine and having their new discs absolutely savaged by the Xbox. Obviously Microsoft replaced the majority of these consoles, and the issue of the console scratching discs was more or less cleared up within the first 6 months. Although, as the years have gone by, the original Xbox has garnered the reputation of having sticky disk drives where the trays would not open up. By all accounts, it's only certain disk drives which do have this issue, and from the reports on the internet, it is only the earlier Xbox models which do have this problem. In hindsight, it's not as severe as a PlayStation 2's disk read error, which was notorious throughout the PlayStation 2's lifecycle. If you do purchase a second-hand Xbox and you do come across this fault, it's a quick Google search away and it should be fixed within a matter of 15 minutes. Moving on to some of the more serious hardware issues. These problems with the original Xbox are surprisingly not widely known by some of the gaming public, but are more notorious among gaming collectors. From 2001 up until 2003, the original Xbox used a power supply from a manufacturer called Foxlink. Through normal use of the original Xbox, the Foxlink power supply would deteriorate over time. Solder joints underneath the power supply port would crack, sometimes creating a buzzing sound inside of the Xbox, or in some really bad cases, create a fire hazard. Microsoft knew of this issue, and to cover their backs, surprisingly only supplied a replacement power cord, which done nothing to stop the solder joints inside of the machine from failing and potentially destroying the Xbox. Understandably, a lot of people at the time who knew the Xbox was going to be a fire hazard vented their frustration on internet forums and actually pointed out that Microsoft was just lying out of their arse, purely because the replacement power supplies did nothing to stop the Xbox from failing, and that the Foxlink power supply inside of the Xbox was going to be a potential fire hazard in the short-term future. And finally, one of the more recent hardware issues which has come to light, purely because of the Xbox's age and some of the cheap components used inside it, is the capacitor which holds the clock charge. And once again, this issue isn't very well known amongst casual gamers, but with Xbox collectors, this hardware issue is quite notorious. Unlike other gaming consoles such as the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation 2, the original Xbox does not use a battery to hold the charge for the clock's memory, and over the years this capacitor which holds this charge for the clock has become notorious for leaking and causing some serious damage inside of the Xbox. By all accounts, it's quite easy to fix, but it does depend on the extent of the damage if the capacitor has leaked. Some people use vinegar to neutralise the acid on the motherboard, whereas some other people use this specialised fluid which gets rid of this particular type of acid inside a capacitor. Regardless if you get the Xbox brand new, it's been sealed and it's never been opened, or if you get a second-hand Xbox and it's barely been played, all Xboxes have this issue apart from the motherboards with the 1.6 revision. The best thing to do as soon as you get an original Xbox is just to open up the case and get rid of that notorious leaking capacitor. In conclusion, when you do weigh in all the pros and cons of the original Xbox, I do think that it's a really great gaming machine. And just like the Sega Dreamcast, the original Xbox was the adult gamer's console of choice for that time. One of the many strong points about the original Xbox was its powerful hardware. While some people didn't like the actual overall design and size of the original Xbox, the inclusion of a hard drive and PC-based accelerated hardware would make it very difficult for Microsoft to create a console case which was very compact, and in later hardware revisions reduce the overall size of the original Xbox. But with all this technical grunt on board of the original Xbox would mean that developers would find it very easy to port some of the big titles from PC over to the console. This would mean that console gamers would be able to get a PC experience on the Xbox but would not have to pay the high prices involved for a PC rig. And during the time of the release of Doom 3, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic and The Elder Scrolls Morrowind, it completely blew console gamers away, purely because these types of games would normally not be possible on a home console. And unfortunately, that seems to be the general consensus for the original Xbox. The majority of gamers do think that it was a machine purely full of PlayStation 2 ports and of PC ports. And while the Xbox did have the better versions of the multi-format titles, the first few years of the original Xbox was the console just receiving quite a few PlayStation 2 ports. But a closer look at the Xbox's library and you soon see some exclusive titles which you might have been missing out on. One of the main highlights for the Xbox for me as a gamer back in the early 2000s was the Sega titles. When Sega announced that they were quitting the console business, it annoyed a lot of gamers at the time, and some people actually refused to buy a PlayStation 2, pinning the blame on Sega's demise on Sony's PlayStation console. While I've never agreed with that view myself, I do believe that the Xbox can be seen as a successor to the Sega's Dreamcast, purely because of all the Sega titles released exclusively for the Xbox. As of 2015, titles such as Gun Valkyrie, ToeJam & Earl 3, Jet Set Radio Future, Crazy Taxi 3 and the amazing Panzer Dragoon Auto have not seen a release outside of the original Xbox's platform. And while the Xbox didn't really have much in the way of Japanese support, it did have a lot of great third-party titles and first-party titles. And although the Xbox sold very well in North America and in Europe, Microsoft found it very difficult for the console to find an audience in Japan, and it's a trend which continues to this day. Microsoft is obviously still in the console business, but a lot of key people who created the Xbox have left the company a long time ago, and I think it does show. People like Jay Allard and Seamus Blackley did a lot to shape the Xbox's overall image and to help build relationships with developers. Some of the original key Xbox members of staff helped point some of the higher ups in Microsoft in the right direction into what to do and what not to do when to release a console. With being gamers themselves, they knew what they wanted from a console. And when you compare the launches of the original Xbox and the launch of the Xbox 360 in comparison to the Xbox One, it does show that it's just not the same people working behind the scenes. In 2009, one of the very first people who initially penned the idea for Xbox, Seamus Blackley, did a lecture with Warren Spector, the creator of Deus Ex, and stated why he thinks in his own opinion why the original Xbox was a failure and what is wrong with the gaming industry as of today.
Well, Xbox was a failure. Xbox is the Halo player. I mean, that was the sad truth of the fact, was that we made this platform that was designed to, do all of those things, and it did a lot of them. But the business of games didn't change. In fact, it became more solidified in the sense that fewer interesting games were made than ever after Xbox came out. In fact, now looking at it from the standpoint of publishers, knowing all about that business, it's terrifying. What a new platform, and that disincentivizes people from taking greater financial risk on new titles. So, it was like, what's going on? There are more crappy licensed games than ever, and my friends like Warren are having fewer opportunities than ever to make new games, and it's the opposite of what we wanted to have happen. And so, it launched, and then it was successfully a platform for me to get engaged. And I realized that the thing I really cared about, which is like the evolution of games as a medium, the thing that drove me to screw up Trespasser and drove me to make all those physics demos and drove me to work with Doug and drove me to try to make this platform, and the thing that the whole way through was exciting to me, which is getting to see where games go, was almost being inhibited by this. And that was a really crappy moment. I guess my entire life has been an exercise in running scared out of my mind from really shitty situations. But I understood that that the problem had to do with business, and then I had to learn something about business, and then I had to find a way to finance or to allow to be made somehow the kinds of great games that I dreamed would have been on Xbox, and the kind of great game that I dreamed Trespasser would be. And simultaneously, I was noticing all my friends getting just screwed in this industry, not in the sense that they should all become multimillionaires and have their own island and jet, but screwed in the sense that they were, not getting enough financial freedom to make beautiful things. They were having to make do in a medium that should be, changing the world and doing all manner of beautiful things.
And so Capital Entertainment Group was an attempt to change the business model, because we have, as you have said repeatedly tonight and throughout the years I've known you, we have a crappy business. In what ways is it crappy? What are the forces that result in the lack of beautifulness that you just described? And in what ways was Capital Entertainment Group an attempt to address those?
Well, Capital Entertainment Group, the forces that impede creativity are it's just fear. I mean, it's like the force that that interferes with everything cool happening in the world. It's fear. And the fear in this case takes the form of a reticence on the part of people who finance games and distribute them to take a risk on unproven things. And that's fine, and that makes complete sense. I mean, you don't want to hand $15 million to some new group of people who have a crazy idea. But I take exception with that when you're fearful of giving somebody with an awesome track record of making beautiful things the opportunity to make the next cool, beautiful thing, simply because it's different from the others. I mean, we've seen now, if you look at it, there are some terrific examples of this. Bungie seceding from Microsoft. Why? Because they didn't want to make Halo 4. I mean, there's a group of people who came up with Halo and 10,000 other ideas, prototyped a bunch of them, and what do they get to do? Well, commercially, the pressure is keep making Halo. Well, you know, we don't really want to keep making the same game over. That's not why we did this. And that's the kind of financial freedom I'm talking about, is the ability to do something new and cool. And the thing that's broken is when, as an industry, you fail to take bets on those people who have done great things and shown their ability to innovate and make games that inspire the audience and that are really great business, and you fail to be able to give those people the chance to make the next franchise and the next thing. Because if you analyze the business, it's those franchises that are the thing that drive everything. When you think of why you're a gamer, you think of like some number of games, and you think of that feeling that you have the first time you played the first Ratchet & Clank, or the first time you played Halo, or the first time you played Grand Theft Auto. It was this awesome thing. It took you somewhere and did something to you that never happened before. And it's not exactly technology, it's not exactly art, it's not exactly music or animation or anything, it's the combination of those things. So how do you engineer a situation on purpose in which like people are taking bets on that next thing and giving the opportunity to people, and it won't always work out, but to the right people, to talented people to do that. And that was our idea there, and that's essentially what I'm still doing today.
So what were you trying, how were you actually going to make that happen as Capital Entertainment Group? You're 4 guys leaving Microsoft with a bunch of connections.
Yeah, I thought I had a big reputation. I could go walk into some VCs and they'd hand me a bunch of cash.
And
that was the sum total of the model.
Awesome. That didn't happen.
No, it wasn't really. But no, it was the worst time to raise money probably in the last 100 years, with no exaggeration, because of the dot-com crash, period. So, we had this experience that a lot of people had who were trying to start businesses at that time, which was a lot of people who got right up to the edge of investing and couldn't for various reasons. Chief among them was that, the demographic of people who have the money to invest in ventures like this is slightly too old to be in the video game demographic. So it's something which is always a little abstract. You see a lot of people investing in film, a lot of people putting crazy money behind movies because they grew up as kids watching movies and they're passionate about it, and it's a great thing they can connect to emotionally. And they can make what are in some cases relatively stupid investments in movies because it's something that's really great to them. And even if they lose it all, like they've been able to be a part of it. And that group of people doesn't quite exist yet for games. So we got a bunch of money from one investor and used that to start some projects and began looking for more money. And in the second round of looking for money, I met these guys from this talent agency in Hollywood who kept calling, and I had no idea who they were, so I didn't call them back. And it turned out they were calling to try to offer me a job because they saw what I was trying to do. Reading the crap I'd said on the internet was exactly, for game developers, what they did for movie people, and they wanted me to go do it there.
And so was it the opportunity to go work with CAA, a company that basically packages stuff in similar ways to what you were trying to do with CEG that led you to go, or was it? It was CEG went away, and you're going, oh my God, how do I make my mortgage payment, or how did?
Well, it's always a combination of both. It's interesting. In the interim, I had produced with the majority of the effort coming from my wife, a child, and since she built him in her body, which is pretty fabulous. It works just like it's advertised. It's interesting. It changes things. Now, previous to that, if you screwed up everything and ended up living in a cardboard box, okay, cool. No error, no foul, we're good. But then, you think about other things. But the real point was that I had definitively failed to create on purpose a situation that would enable any sort of progress forward in my egotistical view of having any influence on this. A way for games to move forward as a medium with Xbox, and we were in the middle of failing to do it with CEG, and I finally went to CAA and had this interview, and I saw 200 people whose entire job was taking ideas from their clients and finding some money to make it to give them the opportunity to do the project. It's like, well, okay, that's the point then. Okay, so could I stand being a Hollywood agent? And looking back at what I mockingly call a career that I've had as a musician, then as a physicist, then as a game designer, then as a God knows what at Microsoft, then as a failed financier, I was like, hey, Hollywood agent? Yeah, that is the obvious next step.
While Seamus Blackley does provide some food for thought on the state of the video game industry, I would have to disagree on the fact that the Xbox was a failure. Now, the Xbox certainly wasn't a profitable business venture by any means, with Microsoft's Xbox division reporting losses for years upon years on end. From a gamer's perspective, in my opinion, the Xbox provided some of the best gaming moments of the early 2000s. Simply put, I chose the Xbox over the PlayStation 2 and the GameCube purely because I had the games that I wanted to play. I remember during the release of Rally Sport Challenge 2, the game played absolutely fantastic and the graphics looked absolutely amazing for the time. It really did feel like you were playing a game which was a generation ahead of the PlayStation 2 and the GameCube. The inclusion of a hard drive in the original Xbox also enhanced the overall gaming experience for me. The feature of being able to play your own music tracks during the game was absolutely mind-blowing for me at the time. Being able to play the likes of Death Row and having your own techno soundtrack blasting in the background really did enhance the overall gaming experience, and it once again provided a feature which you couldn't get on the PlayStation 2 or the GameCube. Another technological achievement that Microsoft achieved at the time was Xbox Live. PlayStation 2 and the GameCube could not touch the Xbox in that area. Microsoft fully embraced broadband gaming, and while at the time a lot of people didn't have broadband internet, games such as Rainbow Six 3, Ghost Recon, Midtown Madness 3, and of course Crimson Skies, were critically acclaimed for providing an online experience not seen on previous consoles. And at the time it really did seem like Microsoft was the first company to finally nail the console which could narrow the gap from PC to console, purely because in previous years when PC games were ported to console, they would either have to be dubbed down or severely redesigned just to purely work on the machine, whereas the original Xbox was designed to be able to run these demanding PC games on a home console. I remember some PC gamers at the time actually bought an Xbox purely because they wanted to save some money, mainly because to buy a new PC or even to upgrade your PC cost more than the Xbox itself. As the years have gone by, the original Xbox has garnered quite a big modding scene. Obviously, by today's standards, the original Xbox's hardware is very dated, but it hasn't stopped some modders out there from turning their Xboxes into fully fledged arcade machines full of console emulators and retro games. This is down to the fact that the Xbox is very easy to mod and the fact that it's also very cheap to purchase off eBay, with some sellers selling them as little as £15 each. But bear in mind that the Xbox is not a lightweight. The console is very heavy and some sellers may charge up to £12 to £15 just to ship the machine, so please bear that in mind if you do buy one online. Just like the Xbox console, the games for the machine tend to go very cheap on eBay and in retail stores, so if you want to build an Xbox collection and you're on a budget, the Xbox is a great investment, purely because the prices for the original Xbox and the games have never been lower in recent years, and prices will only tend to rise as the years go by. So if you want a great second console with fantastic graphics, a great deal of exclusive titles, and with some fantastic features, then the Xbox is certainly the machine which you should try out. There's never been a better time to be an original Xbox owner, and the Xbox provided me with some of the fondest gaming memories of the early 2000s, and that is why it's one of my favourite consoles of all time.
They're an invading force, with one thing on their minds: complete and total domination. They're callous. They're cold-blooded. They're diabolical. Oh, one other thing. They're really cute. Evil has a new face, and it's up to you to face up to it.